CEO of a major company, walks into his office, catches his wife and an employee kissing, and takes an unexpected action that shocks everyone. Brandon had always believed that hard work and integrity were the foundations of his life. The son of humble merchants, he grew up learning the value of effort from an early age, helping his parents in the small local market and observing how they handled daily challenges with perseverance. During his youth, he balanced studies and work, financing his business administration degree with jobs that took up his nights, while his days were dedicated to university. His dedication paid off. Over time, he became a businessman known for his strategic skill and strict ethics, founding a company that thrived based on the same principles that guided his life. Alongside Pamela, his wife of many years, he built a stable family and a home that seemed to reflect the success of his professional life. To everyone who knew him, Brandon was the epitome of the perfect balance between the demands of a successful career and the building of solid relationships. The morning began like any other in Brandon and Pamela's routine. The sound of the alarm echoed in the room, and Brandon, as always, was the first to get up. He walked to the kitchen, making coffee while mentally reviewing the tasks for the day. Pamela appeared moments later, adjusting her hair and putting on an earring. "Is today going to be a busy day, Brandon?" she asked casually as she grabbed a cup of coffee. "Busy is an understatement," Brandon replied with a light laugh. "I have meetings scheduled for the whole morning, but I hope to wrap them up early. Maybe we can go out for dinner tonight." Pamela smiled briefly. "That would be great. We could talk about that trip we've been planning." Brandon nodded, pleased with the prospect of ending the day on a relaxed note. Soon after, they were ready and left the house. In the car, Brandon drove with focus while Pamela reviewed something on her phone. Their conversation was brief, punctuated by comments about traffic and the day's commitments. "Andrew reminded me yesterday that the finance team wants to discuss the new projections. I think it's going to be a long conversation," Brandon said, mentally organizing his priorities. "And you, any specific plans for today?" Pamela put her phone away and casually replied, "Nothing major. I thought I'd catch up on some emails while I wait for you." They arrived at the company just after 8. Upon entering, they were greeted with the usual salutations. "Good morning, Mr. Brandon. Mrs. Pamela," said one of the security guards, opening the main door. "Good morning," Brandon replied with a courteous wave. Pamela, as always, maintained her discreet smile while adjusting her bag on her shoulder. Before Brandon could walk to the elevator, Andrew, his assistant, hurried over with his notepad in hand. "Mr. Brandon," he said urgently, "the finance team is already waiting in the meeting room. They arrived early." Brandon checked his watch and nodded. "Perfect. Thanks, Andrew." Turning to Pamela, he added, "I'll be a few hours. Would you prefer to stay in the office?" Pamela adjusted her hair and calmly responded, "Yes, I'll wait there. I have a few things to catch up on." Brandon kissed her on the forehead. "See you later then." "See you," she replied with a smile that seemed routine to him. The meeting started promptly, with Brandon entering the room and being greeted by the finance team. Over the next few hours, they discussed projections, analyzed charts, and mapped out strategies for the next semester. Brandon, though focused, felt the accumulated fatigue. The discussions required his full attention, and he made sure to give thoughtful responses to each question. When the meeting finally ended, he stood up, adjusting his tie and letting out a sigh of relief. Andrew was waiting outside. "Mr. Brandon," he said hesitantly, "just to remind you, the logistics team scheduled the meeting for an hour from now." Brandon, with a tired expression, let out a brief laugh. "Another meeting. It looks like my day turned into a marathon, Andrew." Andrew chuckled politely. "I can ask them to reschedule if you prefer." Brandon shook his head. "No, it's fine. I'll go to the office to rest a bit before." Let me know when it's time." Walking through the hallways toward his office, Brandon thought about the next steps of the day. His mind was still immersed in the numbers from the meeting, but he began to relax as he imagined the time he'd have to reorganize his priorities. When he reached the door to his office, he opened it with the automatic gesture of someone used to the routine. But what he saw upon entering made him freeze. Paul, a young employee whom Brandon had hired just over a year ago, was kissing Pamela passionately, holding her by the waist as she responded with equal intensity. The sight made Brandon's heart stop for a moment. He stood still, unable to comprehend what was happening. It was as if the world around him had stopped, and his mind struggled to believe that his eyes were not deceiving him. "This can't be real," Brandon thought, a knot forming in his throat. Pamela, my Pamela, and Paul? The seconds seemed to stretch, and Brandon felt as though the ground was crumbling beneath his feet. His chest tightened with a mixture of shock, anger, and sadness. 10 years of marriage, he muttered to himself, not realizing the words were escaping his lips. Brandon quickly closed the door, trying not to make noise. His movements were almost automatic, and he backed away, walking down the hallway with trembling steps. His mind spun in 1,000 directions, but the only clear thought was the need to leave the place before he lost control. When he reached Andrew's desk again, Brandon tried to compose himself, but his face betrayed his distress. "Andrew," he said, his voice hoarse, "cancel all my meetings for today." Andrew looked up, surprised. "Sir, is something wrong?" Brandon took a deep breath and responded firmly, though his voice carried visible tension. "Yes, I need to resolve something urgent. Please inform everyone." Andrew, though concerned, nodded quickly. "Understood, Mr. Brandon." Brandon walked toward the exit, feeling the curious gaze of the employees around him, but he didn't care. When he got into his car, he let his body slump into the seat, resting his hands on the steering wheel. "How did this happen?" he asked aloud, as images of Pamela and Paul kept replaying in his mind. All these years, didn't they mean anything to her? The pain of betrayal was overwhelming, and Brandon struggled to maintain clarity of thought. Paul, of all people, someone I trusted to work by my side. Not knowing exactly what to do, he began driving aimlessly, letting the movement of the car help him think. The city streets blurred past as Brandon mentally replayed every moment of his marriage, searching for signs he might have ignored. She chose someone much younger, someone who works for me. The humiliation hit him like a wave, but he knew he had to remain calm to decide his next step. After wandering for some time, an idea finally occurred to him. "Joseph," he said, almost as if the name were an anchor amidst the chaos. "He'll know what to do." Joseph had been his friend since college, a man with a clear vision and always willing to offer sensible advice. Brandon decided to go to him. "If anyone can help me think clearly, it's Joseph," he said to himself as he turned the car toward his friend's house. Brandon drove through the city streets, each block seeming to drag in slow motion. The lights of the traffic signals, the headlights of the cars around him, and the pedestrians crossing the streets were mere blurs in his peripheral vision. His thoughts consumed him completely. "Why, Pamela, how could you do this to me?" he murmured to himself, feeling his chest tighten with almost physical pain. The image of her and Paul kissing remained vivid in his mind, like a scene he couldn't erase, no matter how hard he tried. When he finally arrived at Joseph's house, he parked the car and took a deep breath before getting out. His hands trembled as he rang the doorbell. The sound echoed in the quiet night, and a few seconds later, the door opened to reveal Joseph. The warm smile of his friend quickly turned to a look of concern when he saw Brandon's weary face. "Brandon, what happened? You look terrible," Joseph said, leaning slightly forward as if trying to see beyond the calm mask Brandon was trying to maintain. Joseph. Brandon's voice came out weak, almost a whisper. I need to talk to you. Something happened. Something very serious. Joseph furrowed his brow, opened the door completely, and gestured for Brandon to come in. Of course, of course. Come in, sit down. You know you can always count on me. He led him into the living room and pointed to the couch. I'll get something to drink. You look like you need water. Or something stronger. Brandon shook his head. Water is fine, thanks. He sat on the couch, resting his elbows on his knees and burying his face in his hands. He felt the weight of the moment as though he were carrying the entire world on his shoulders. Joseph returned with 2 bottles of water, handed one to Brandon, and sat beside him. Now tell me, he said, in a calm but serious tone. What happened? Brandon remained silent for a few moments, trying to find the words. When he finally spoke, his voice was hoarse and heavy with emotion. Today, Joseph, today was the worst day of my life. I saw something I could never have imagined. I caught Pamela, kissing Paul. He stopped, swallowing hard as tears threatened to fall. Paul, the employee I hired just over a year ago. Someone I trusted, someone I thought had potential. Joseph was stunned. What? Are you serious, Brandon? You saw this with your own eyes? Yes, Brandon replied, almost in a whisper. I walked into my office after a meeting, and there they were, as if nothing in the world could stop them. They didn't see me, but I saw everything. It was like being punched in the stomach. I froze. I couldn't say anything. I just closed the door and walked out. Joseph ran a hand over his face, clearly shaken. This is devastating. I don't even know what to say, Brandon. And Pamela, does she know you saw? No, Brandon answered, shaking his head. I controlled myself. I don't know how, but I did. I left before I did something I would regret. Believe me, Joseph, every fiber of my being wanted to go into that room and end it all, yell, throw them both out. But I didn't, because I knew that if I lost control, I would lose everything. Joseph breathed deeply, trying to organize his thoughts. Brandon, I admire your strength. I don't know if I could hold myself together in a situation like that, but now you need to decide what you're going to do. You can't ignore this. Brandon nodded, but his eyes were filled with tears. The pain is unbearable, Joseph. 10 years. 10 years of marriage. I thought we were happy, and now I find out she's been cheating with a younger man who also works for me. It makes everything feel so much worse. Of course it hurts, Brandon, and it's natural to feel anger, disappointment, humiliation, but you're a smart man, and you've always known how to handle difficult situations. This one will be no different. You need to think clearly. Don't act in the heat of the moment, because that will only make things worse. How can I think clearly when all I want to do is confront them? I want to ask Pamela how she had the courage to do this to me. I want to know what went through her mind. I understand, Brandon, but confronting her now might not bring the answers you're looking for. First, you need to decide what you want. Do you want to try to save the marriage, or do you want to end it? And what about Paul? He can't keep working for you, but how will you handle that without harming your company? Brandon rested his head in his hands, fighting against the whirlwind of emotions. I don't know, Joseph. All I know is that nothing will be the same again. I've lost trust in Pamela. I've lost respect for her. And as for Paul, he's betrayed me in an unforgivable way. I don't know how to deal with that. Joseph placed a hand on Brandon's shoulder. You'll get through this, Brandon, but you need to remember who you are. You've always been a fair, upright man. Use that to your advantage. Face this situation with dignity. Don't let Pamela and Paul's betrayal destroy the man you are. Brandon nodded slowly, feeling a slight relief in his friend's words. Thanks, Joseph. I don't know what I'd do without you. You always have the right words to help me see things more clearly. That's what friends are for, Joseph said with a reassuring smile. "And remember, no matter how tough it seems now, you're stronger than you think. You'll get through this." Brandon thanked him again and said goodbye, feeling a little more prepared to face what lay ahead. On his way back home, his mind was calmer, but he knew the pain of the betrayal would stay with him for a while. When he arrived home, he found Pamela sitting on the couch, fiddling with her phone. She looked up when she heard him enter. "Brandon, where have you been? Andrew said you left in a hurry, cancelled all your meetings and left. I was worried." Brandon felt a mix of anger and disdain as he listened to her speak so casually, as if nothing had happened. But he controlled himself, as he always did. "Joseph called me for something urgent related to his company," he said calmly. "I thought it was something serious, so I left right away. But in the end, it wasn't that grave. I forgot to tell you, sorry." Pamela nodded, seeming relieved. "It's fine. I was just worried because you seemed so serious when you left." "It was a tough day," Brandon replied, looking away. "I'm going to take a shower and rest." Throughout the rest of the night, Brandon maintained the facade of normality. But inside, he felt his anger and disdain growing with each passing moment. Pretending was exhausting, but necessary until he was ready to act. The next morning, the couple left early for the company. The drive in the car was silent, with Pamela fiddling with her phone while Brandon drove, lost in thoughts about the next step he would take. Arriving at the company that morning, Brandon drove into the parking lot. The silence in the car interrupted only by the sound of the notifications on Pamela's phone. He parked the vehicle, took a deep breath, and looked at the company building where he had built everything through effort and integrity. As they entered the building, Andrew found them in the lobby, hurrying over with his notepad. "Good morning, Mr. Brandon," Andrew said in a polite but concerned tone. "How are you? You left so abruptly yesterday, I was worried." Brandon forced a brief smile, controlling any trace of emotion. "Good morning, Andrew. Everything's fine. Joseph called me for something at his company, and I ended up leaving in a hurry. Sorry I didn't let you know better." He paused before continuing. "Today, I don't want to attend any commitments or meetings. I'll spend the day reviewing some documents." Andrew nodded promptly. "Of course, sir. I'll reorganize your schedule and inform the team." He glanced at Pamela, who seemed oblivious to the conversation, still fiddling with her phone. "If you need anything, I'll be in my office." "Thank you, Andrew," Brandon replied, already walking toward the elevator with Pamela at his side. When they reached the floor, Brandon turned to her. "I'm going to my office. I'll see you later." Pamela gave him a mechanical smile. "Okay, I'll finish some things in my office." Brandon entered his office and closed the door, sitting in the leather chair that felt heavier than ever. He spent the next few hours immersed in thoughts, reviewing every possibility, every consequence. He knew that the confrontation with Paul and Pamela was inevitable. He needed to handle it with dignity, but firmly. After making a decision, he grabbed the phone and called Andrew. "Andrew, send Paul to my office. Tell him it's urgent." "Yes, sir. He should be on his way." A few minutes later, there was a soft knock at the door. "Come in," Brandon said, his voice firm. Paul opened the door with a professional smile and entered, closing the door behind him. "Mr. Brandon, Andrew said you needed to speak with me." "Yes, Paul, please, have a seat." Brandon gestured to the chair in front of the desk, his voice firm but not hostile. Paul closed the door behind him, maintaining a calm expression as he settled in. Brandon, on the other hand, leaned slightly forward, crossing his hands on the desk. "Paul," Brandon began in a calm but direct tone, "I wanted to talk to you about your position at the company. After reviewing operations and future strategic planning, I've decided it would be better for both sides if you part ways with our team." Paul blinked, visibly surprised. "Mr. Brandon, this is unexpected. May I know the exact reason?" I've been working hard since I started here. It's not about your performance or dedication, Brandon replied, maintaining an unyielding expression. It's a decision that's part of an overall restructuring. We need to make adjustments to meet the company's new priorities. Paul frowned, nervously crossing his hands. Sir, if there's something specific I can improve, I'm willing to do anything. I've always considered it an honor to work here and learn from you. I recognize your work, Paul, Brandon said, his voice firm. But this decision has been made, and there is no room for reconsideration. You will receive fair compensation and all necessary support for the transition. Paul took a deep breath, clearly trying to process the situation. Mr. Brandon, I feel I still have a lot to contribute to the company. I can help with new projects, take on different responsibilities. Please, give me a chance to prove this. Brandon kept his gaze fixed on Paul, letting the silence weigh before answering. Paul, it's not a matter of ability. Decisions like this are never easy, but they are necessary. My decision is final, and I hope you respect that. Paul realized there was no room left for argument. He slowly stood up, adjusting his suit, and extended his hand to Brandon. Thank you for the opportunity to work here. It was a privilege. Brandon shook his hand firmly. I wish you success in whatever comes next. Paul left the room slowly, and Brandon leaned back in the chair, letting out a heavy sigh. He knew the next conversation would be even more difficult. He picked up the phone and called Andrew. Please, ask Pamela to come to my office. I need to speak with her. Yes, sir, I'll inform her now. A few minutes later, Pamela entered the room without knocking, as usual. Brandon, Andrew said you wanted to speak with me. Did something happen? Brandon looked at her, his eyes serious. Please close the door and sit down. The authoritative tone made Pamela hesitate before obeying. When she sat down, Brandon crossed his arms over the desk and remained silent for a few moments, as if carefully choosing his words. Yesterday, he finally said, when I returned to the office after the meeting, I saw something that changed everything. Pamela frowned in confusion. Something? What do you mean, Brandon? Brandon leaned forward, fixing his eyes on her. I saw you and Paul in my office. I saw you both kissing. Pamela's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Brandon continued, his voice controlled. I walked in, saw it with my own eyes, and walked out without saying a word. There's nothing you can say to deny this. Pamela quickly shook her head, the words finally spilling out in a rush. Brandon, it wasn't what it seemed. It was a moment of weakness, a terrible mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't love you. Please, listen to me. A moment of weakness. Brandon laughed bitterly, his voice filled with sarcasm. Is that how you justify betraying 10 years of marriage? Betraying someone who trusted you, who believed our relationship was solid? And with Paul, an employee of mine, someone I trusted. Pamela began to cry, her words coming out in sobs. Brandon, I made a horrible mistake, but I regret it deeply. I don't know what I was thinking. Please don't throw everything away because of this. I'm not throwing anything away, Pamela, Brandon said, his voice firm. You threw it away. You destroyed the foundation of our marriage, which was trust. Without that, there's nothing left. I want a divorce. Pamela's eyes widened and desperation took over. No, Brandon, please, don't make that decision now. We can get through this. We can fix things. Get through this. Brandon shook his head slowly. You think I can forget what I saw? You think I can pretend it never happened? Pamela, I deserve more than this. I deserve someone who respects me, who values what we built together. Brandon, please. Pamela sobbed, standing up. I still love you. I don't want to lose you. We can try again. I'll do anything. It's too late, Pamela, he said, standing up as well. I'm a patient man, but even patience has its limits. My decision is made. Pamela left the room crying uncontrollably, and Brandon stood still for a few seconds, staring at the closed door. He felt a mixture of relief and sadness, but he knew he had done what was necessary. The divorce was settled practically without long battles. Brandon made sure to be fair regarding the assets, but made it clear there was no possibility of reconciliation. Pamela tried to reconnect a few times, but Brandon remained firm in his decision. In the following months, Brandon reorganized his life. He focused on his business, sold part of the company to focus on new projects, and spent more time on himself. The pain of betrayal lessened with time, and he found comfort in the support of friends like Joseph. Brandon also began seeking new forms of happiness, exploring hobbies he had set aside, and traveling to places he had always wanted to see. Eventually, Brandon realized that despite the pain and difficulties, he was stronger than he had imagined. He had lost a marriage but preserved his dignity and his values. And in the end, that was what really mattered. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, give it a like, and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. See you in the next story.